We saw this movie. What do you call the movie? What the bleep do we know? Okay, so simply, there are 8 international scientists.
It all started when we saw the film What the Bleep Do We Know? We are members of the World Academy of Kabbalah, headed by Rav Michael Leitner. Having seen the film, we were surprised at how close modern science has come to confirming the Kabbalistic view of the universe. Scientists, specializing in quantum physics, have discovered on their own the depth of matter described by Kabbalists more than 3,000 years ago. And we decided to go meet with them.
So they give a very good example. They say that an Indian is standing on the beach, and he looks into the ocean, and Columbus ships start arriving, but he doesn't see the ships. Why can't he see them? Because he doesn't have in his mind the same model as a big house that floats on the sea. The truth is that they're wrong, because the ship doesn't exist either. It only exists in the imagination of whoever imagines. This world doesn't exist. But what do I want to say? What about this example is good? If you don't have the vessels, you don't recognize anything on the outside. How do I build a vessel inside of me if I don't know what something is on the outside of me? I need somebody to tell me about it. There's no other way. That's why the Kabbalistic sages write books for you, for us. And according to these books, you start imagining what's out there. And from this imagination, slowly you build patterns and some kinds of shapes in your mind. For sure, they're not correct, but slowly, by longing, by desire, you invite a light that is building shapes more and more close to what it is. And then you start reaching that point where you can actually see. The light is built within the vessel. Imagine that a caveman just appeared right now into this world, like you see sometimes in the movies. So he's in this world and he's walking around and he's seeing everything that's happening, but he wouldn't be able to see anything, nothing. So can this Indian pass through this wall? Yes, he can. He has no sense of it, and it's not there for him. For him, there's no material and not a shape dressed in the material. Simple as that. If we get away from the way we usually see, we'll come to the true point that the Kabbalists are telling us, that seems so strange to us. And those scientists who study quantum physics, why do they come to this realization?
At that deepest subnuclear level of our reality, you and I are literally one.
Because they enter a world that has strange rules. Suddenly, one thing can be in 2 places. Or time and space and movement can be in another shape. And they come to this same thought. Everything depends on the one who perceives it. And that's why whether you pass through the wall or you don't, exists only towards me, but it doesn't exist on its own. And what does towards me mean? It means, according to my vessels, it will be yes or no. Only in this world we're born with 5 vessels, and we develop from one generation to the next. So a child is born and immediately begins to develop in such a way that he's in an environment and in a world that grows along with him. He's the one who captures the world, and it becomes a fact to him. All the rest, the shapes, everything is immaterial, and he's the one who gives it meaning through his five senses. All these five senses are the way that we get things, and we produce these things according to what they manufacture. Can we reach the wisdom of Kabbalah through quantum physics? No. Otherwise, Abraham would have dealt with quantum physics first. They're talking about love, and it's all one world, because they're feeling a movement towards this form. But how do you implement this? Quantum physics can't answer this, because this is the upper force.
If we, the ones who really feel from within the heart, the point in the heart, the desire to go back to spirituality and feel it, we begin to learn about our situation up here. And that's the wisdom of Kabbalah. So we learn about us being here, when in fact we are already in that state, but we don't feel it. But by wanting in our blocked states to awaken and feel the true state, if we learn about our true situation, we draw on ourselves. It's as if we draw the light that's present there. Because I'm in that world, in that state, I just don't, I'm not aware of it. But if I make every effort to become conscious of it, to be awakened, my desire, my impulse to do it opens up my additional vessels, and then we begin to feel spirituality. What does that mean? We begin to feel how we are all interconnected as one body, and then through each and every one, infinite light follows endlessly and without any limitations. And all the problems that we feel today in the world is only so as to force humanity to begin to go back up.
You know, I had been studying physics, and I knew something about that technology, but Kabbalah as a science was something that never would have even dawned on me. I don't care what you're doing. There's something about this field of way of thinking, of seeing, which can improve anything. And I don't care if you're a Jew, a Muslim, Gentile, Arab, I don't care what you are. I don't care what nationality, I don't care what religion you belong to. Kabbalah will help liberate your mind from any shackles of thought that keep you ensconced or enclosed into a certain way of thinking. Now, if these words are awakening you right now, you know it. If they're not awakening you right now, then I'm suggesting to you that you've fallen asleep.
Indeed, Kabbalah does have an awful lot to say.
I don't hear anything, I don't see anything, but I feel.
There are these three-dimensional pictures like wallpapers. If you look at them and you defocus your eye, then you go into the picture and you find a three-dimensional picture.
Random. When you look at it at the beginning, it looks like just a jagged random pattern.
Yes.
And then after a while, you see a kind of flat 3D image emerge. But
So these things. So what the wisdom of Kabbalah actually does is it helps you get that picture. It doesn't do anything new, actually. It just focuses and aims your attributes and everything in you in such a way that you begin to see into matter.
I want to know, do we reincarnate? And if so, what part of us is reincarnated? Because why don't we remember anything about previous lives?
Okay, if you really want to know, here we go. Yes, we do, and reincarnation can be experienced either internally or externally, depending on our conscious involvement and agreement with the force that's developing us. Now, death was inserted into the system as a result of the breaking, the shattering of the first man, of the collective soul. And so each one of the parts of that soul is a so-called individual soul, and it consists of 613 desires to receive just for itself. And each one of these desires is influenced by a constant force of development that's working on it with the purpose of bringing it to its perfected state so that it's transformed into a desire to bestow. And this happens over and over again until all of them are corrected. So no matter how it may appear to us while we're undergoing this process, everything always progresses and it never falls back. All spiritual growth is cumulative. Now, on the internal, on the causal level, an incarnation begins with the appearance of a spiritual body, which is a desire, but in its uncorrected state. And first it feels pleasure by satisfying itself, and then inside of that satisfaction, it begins to sense that it's not just taking from nowhere, but that pleasure is being purposely given to it from a higher level. And now, since it feels that, it wants to reach that level of experience so that it can feel the pleasure of giving instead. But to do that, it has to stop receiving. It has to stop experiencing itself as a receiver. So it's given what's called a screen, an intention that allows it to do that. And this is really the beginning of new life on the inner level, rather than death. Because even though the appearance of each new state is first felt as empty or dark, that only happens because the vessel, the desire, still only identifies and is locked into its old definition of life and pleasure, the one that's trying to leave. So even though what's coming is bigger and better, it's so opposite a perception that we don't feel like there's anything there. Now, let's look at the unconscious physical level. Here, the exact same mechanism is perceived as a mysterious, intimate inner quality that clothes in a succession of protein bodies, each with its unique talents and personality, appearing and disappearing one after another over thousands of years. And with each cycle of death and birth, it completely forgets the conditions of its former life, because if it's going to encompass change and attain a higher level of reality, it won't be in that mind, because reality won't fit in there. And what it's been, how it's developed, and each past life accumulates as its innate nature. And a new mind functions as the operating system necessary for its next stage of development. So what part of us reincarnates? The individual soul, in the process of realizing its connection to the collective soul, is the basis of that inner part, the I. And the body exists in this world only to help it elevate and attain its true state. It's so insignificant in comparison to the soul that we can exchange organs and limbs with other species and continue to live, even without all of our body parts, because the body exists for the sake of the soul. So, a Kabbalist is a person who has studied and learned how to be consciously involved in this process of becoming like the will to bestow. And he can inwardly pass through many lifetimes in a day. And by doing that, the soul feels such delight that eventually he no longer needs to descend into this world, but exists in a completely different, eternal and perfected state. But until this inner quality awakens in a person where they want to work with the real causal process, they've got to continue to be born and to die according to the perception of the will to receive. So it's really our choice. We can do it one way or the other.
One question that I would really like an answer to is, what can we do at an individual level and through Kabbalah to change the world situation, such as global warming, war in many places, famine, the tsunami. Many people feel very confused. Is this the will of God? Is this punishment? What answers does Kabbalah have, and how can Kabbalah help?
What can we do as individuals? Great question. Because there are no physical, political, scientific, or humanitarian actions that can change this situation if we don't change it individually first. Quantum physics has recently discovered that the results of experiments are determined in some way by the person doing them, but they don't yet know how this happens or the extent of the influence. The wisdom of Kabbalah is an ancient science dealing precisely with how human awareness affects reality. The Kabbalists, through their investigations using a method of experimentation that incorporates human awareness, having penetrated the causal forces, reveal in their books that the general law, which they call the thought of creation, is to create a creature and to fill the creature with complete fulfillment. In other words, we and everything in existence are undergoing a process of development with the goal of reaching a perfected state exactly like the state of the force that created us. You could call this the will of God, the blueprint, containing the purpose, meaning, and outcome of life in all its details and all the forces that bring this about. It's an intention, a desire. It is good that does good. It never changes. We do. All the disasters and the wars that we're now experiencing are just the measure of the difference between the quality of our individual and collective intention and the quality of intention behind this law governing nature called light. The inner life of humanity is the determining factor for how nature treats us. So how can that be? The inanimate, vegetative, and animal levels of existence are actually parts of us. The only difference between them is the amount of desire for change they have, the amount of quality as opposed to quantity. That's why there's so much inanimate matter in the universe compared to the number of even the simplest organic life forms. One rose contains the desire of all the rocks in the universe. One fly contains the desire of all the plants on earth. And one person contains and eclipses the desire of the entire system below them. So an individual affects all of reality according to how similar or dissimilar their inner qualities are to the light. So what can an individual do? Change their inner qualities. Kabbalah tells us what quality to change and how.
My question is, why can't we all just get along in the world today? Is there room for everyone?
Yeah, why can't we get along? I mean, it seems so simple, doesn't it? I mean, I love all people. Why can't everyone be like me? But the problem is, none of that's really true. It's actually the other way around. It's your inner intention that's screwing things up. I mean, this antagonism can't be fixed from the outside in. It's not up to other people. Nobody can fix it but you. And we're all in the same boat. Our very nature is egoism, the will to receive. And the whole of what we call creation consists only of that. And what surrounds that is the law of nature. And the law of nature is altruism. Its essential force is love. And every detail of it keeps the general law of the universe and functions like one vast organism. And all the things that seem to exist outside of us as separate objects, they all work together just like organs inside of that body. They receive only and exactly what they need to survive, and they give everything that they can for the well-being of the whole. And science is now discovering this law everywhere. In deep space, in the ecosystem, in the atom. Everything in nature functions that way, except for the inner life of a person. The law of human nature is just the opposite. To receive as much as possible, to satisfy the self, which always ends up being at the expense of others. Can you imagine how long a human body would last if it was made up of cells that thought and felt the way that we do? How? I mean, that's the very definition of cancer, isn't it? Right now, everything that we do, even the most outwardly kind and generous acts, are done only with the intention for self-satisfaction. Okay, it's not our fault. We were built this way. But as long as we rely on our created nature to guide us, we're never really going to get along or love anybody else, no matter how nice we think we are. Our inner life wasn't designed as a place to obsess about ourselves. It's the place of transformation and connection with the law of nature, the singular force of love. So, to heal the global hatred that you see all around, you need a method of using your egoistic nature in a way that allows you to rise above it. That's why all the religions and the deepest dreams of our hearts say we must love our neighbor as ourselves. Love others exactly as you love yourself, putting their interests before anything else, just like you do with your own right now. Because nobody can fix this but you. All religions preach that, but only the wisdom of Kabbalah explains how to realize it.
Why am I never satisfied?
Why are we never satisfied? Well, it's a good thing that you're not, because that's the way that we feel the motivating force behind all development, both in the physical and in the spiritual hidden causative level of nature. Anything that we feel as movement, from moving to some other part of the world to the subtlest shift in an inner attitude, happens only because this force has made us so uncomfortable and unable to fulfill our desires in our current state that we begin to feel a need for a greater satisfaction that we calculate must exist in that new situation. And we move just that far and no further. A person doesn't even move a finger or scratch their nose if not for this calculation. How to get the maximum amount of pleasure for the minimum amount of effort. It is the E equals MC squared of the ego. This formula is so pervasive that we never choose anything unless it's presented to us in that way. We only choose between what we consider to be painful or pleasurable, and we always choose pleasure. Either an immediate one or a big enough one in the future that we're willing to pay for with a little bit of suffering. But pleasure does not exist in and of itself. There has to be something opposite to it in nature before it can be sensed. We never experience anything as its essence, only by comparison. We feel light compared to darkness, warmth compared to cold, pleasure compared to pain. If there's nothing opposite to it, there is simply no sensation. Pleasure is actually the meeting point between a need and its fulfillment, and the greater that the need is, the greater the experience of pleasure. So why is it that pleasure always disappears? You know what it's like when you're a little hungry. You start thinking about what you could eat. Maybe a pretzel. Yeah, okay, maybe later. But the hunger keeps on growing. Maybe I'll have a couple of hot dogs. No, a whole pizza. No, I know, a steak, a big sirloin. Vegetarians, please substitute a tofu loaf from your imagination, with a baked potato and all the condiments imaginable. And then when dinner finally comes, you could eat a steak so big that it needs its own area code. And that first bite is pure ecstasy. And the next bite is wonderful. The next bite is good. And the next bite is okay. And the next is whatever it is. And the next one is, no, not another bite. I'm going to be sick. The need is diminished. It no longer stands opposite to the steak. And now the pleasure can't be sensed because the need has been extinguished. And this all happens because we're trying to satisfy only ourselves. And that egoistic desire is ultimately what makes human experience limited and physical. Because our own needs are tiny, and they're built in such a way that they can never be satisfied. And yet we find ourselves longing for lasting pleasure, and we feel that somehow it must exist. And it does. But in order to feel that, first, we need an unlimited, ever-expanding desire that can draw a boundless fulfillment. And to do that, you have to seek pleasure in the fulfillment of others. Because this desire to bestow is a spiritual desire, and one taste of it is greater than all the pleasure felt by all creatures over all time. Because it's a pleasure not felt in our little subjective needs, but in everything. There's no limit to that desire, and there is no end to the pleasure derived from that need. tree of life. Behold, that before the emanations were emanated and the creatures created, the upper simple light had filled the whole existence. And there was no vacancy, such as an empty atmosphere, a hollow, or a pit, but all was filled with simple, boundless light. And there was no such part as head or tail, but everything was simple, smooth, light, balanced evenly and equally, and it was called the endless light. And when upon his simple will came the desire to create the world and emanate the emanations, to bring to light the perfection of his deeds, his names, his appellations, which was the cause of the creation of the worlds. He then restricted himself in the middle. Precisely in the center, he restricted the light, and the light drew far off to the sides around that middle point. And there remained an empty space, a vacuum, circling the middle point, and the restriction had been uniform around the empty point, so that the space was evenly circled around it. There, after the restriction, having formed a vacuum and a space, precisely in the middle of the endless light, a place was formed where the emanated and the created might reside. Then from endless light a single line hung down, lowered down into that space, and through that line he emanated, formed, created all the worlds. Before these four worlds came to be, there was one infinite, one main in wondrous hidden unity, that even for the closest of angels there is no attainment in the endless. As there is no mind that can perceive it, for he has no place, no boundary, no name.
is the simplest way to stop the commentary that's ongoing inside our minds when we're trying to interact with the world.
Ah, okay, so you want to be able to control your thoughts. Of course, because sometimes we find ourselves in a situation where we start having thoughts that we don't want. So we try to grab hold of our thinking and wrestle it or find ways to direct it to where we want it to go. And if we can't do that, then we feel uncomfortable or stupid or out of control. Because we assume that the way things happen is that we start to think about things and we pick something to focus on and we analyze it and we weigh it and then we visualize an attitude and direct our reactions, and then we come up with the idea of what's important or correct. And then we decide that's worth going after, and we start doing one thing or another to bring that thing about. If we could just do that, then we'd be happy. But that is not how things happen at all. In fact, it is completely the opposite way round. Thought is not the starting point of our feelings and actions. The self is not thought. Thought's a product of something much deeper. Desire is the closest thing to the self of a person. First, we feel a desire. We don't think it, we just feel it. It's desire that gives rise to thought, and that's why we only think about what we want or why we don't have what we want or how to get and keep what we want. A desire brings with it an operating system to help it grow and to perform its work. We can't change our desires with our thoughts. We can only magnify them. We can't change our thoughts with our thoughts. So if we want great thoughts, we need great desires. So the question really is, how do I change what I desire?